It's 1990. Providence has a high crime rate, people are moving away, and large swaths of the municipal budget tend to mysteriously disappear every year. Who can come and make this mess into an actual thriving city? It will take a special breed, someone who can pretend to play by the rules, but also break them behind the scenes. It will take a gamer. But before we dive into why 1990 was weird in Rhode Island, let's remember why everything has been weird for the past few years. So in 2020 during the plague, during the Panini times, look I'm not doing this YouTube newspeak thing, we had the novel coronavirus running around and it fucked shit up. One of the least important but most visible effects of COVID was its effect on entertainment, namely sports. Starting in March 2020, every big league or sporting event was either postponed, suspended, or outright cancelled. But in this wonderfully modern era, broadcasters and league officials had more options to fill the airwaves other than reruns of old stuff. In 2020, for a little weird while, every big sport became an e-sport. In the 2020s, we all play video games, whether on a console in the bedroom, idly in the browser during work, or on our phones literally anywhere, but especially on the shitter. Thus, making people understand video games is not an obstacle anymore when it comes to showing them competitively. They are, however, still perceived as a very different thing from sports, which are of course based on athleticism. This did not stop the leagues and broadcasting companies trying to exchange the usual in-person superspreader events with a safe digital alternative played in the safety of everybody's locked down home. Motorsport had the easiest time going digital. Mainly because iRacing, the platform most often chosen to simulate real-life events such as NASCAR, is in fact highly realistic and often used by professionals, if not to train, then to at least keep their instincts sharp in the off-season. And of course, simulators play a big role in developing cars, for example in Formula 1. Thus, playing pretend being exciting is not that big of a stretch for a racing fan. Other video game substitutions were less successful, such as the Phoenix Suns streaming their squad playing NBA 2K, or the NFL holding a virtual Pro Bowl with players and celebrities playing against each other. It's not hard to understand why the latter examples were met with less enthusiasm. Watching athletes push their bodies to the max is very different from watching them push buttons. Even the racing examples lack the excitement of the drivers having to fight several Gs in every turn. Seriously, have you seen the massive necks on F1 drivers? As you can see today if you look at any of the myriad streaming services, televised sport remains its physical self and video games are relegated to a secondary status as a spectator sport. Yes, esports is definitely a thing, but its popularity never hit a peak of what real-life athletic performance achieves. So did 2020 definitely prove that video games simply cannot properly simulate complex human competition? Well, what if I told you that it kinda worked 30 years before, and with a much loftier goal than choosing a winner of a sporting event, in choosing a mayor of an American city? And now back to Providence, Rhode Island. For a bit, we will also have to move away from video games. For the most of the 20th century, the city of Providence was known as an industrial town in a continuous decline. The mob had essentially taken over, and the rates of crime were going up alongside the population going down. The first real turning point came in the mid-1970s, with the arrival of one of the most interesting and controversial political figures in the US history, Vincent Cianci, who preferred when people called him Buddy. From the outside looking in, it's really easy for me to tell you that Buddy Cianci was simply a scumbag. But I know that many residents of Providence would vehemently disagree, or agree, and then let me know why he was actually good for the city. Cianci's big break into the public limelight happened in the early 70s, when he was a prosecutor in the Attorney General's corruption strike force. Going hard after the mobsters and even the local government earned him the reputation of being an anti-corruption crusader. which is also the platform he ran on when he decided to enter his first ever mayoral race in 1974, which he won. When it comes to political affinity, Cianci was a Republican, and his meteoric rise was not unnoticed by the higher-ups in the GOP, to the point where his name was in the conversation about who the next Republican vice president could be. However, his attempts to climb above local government crashed every time he tried, including an unsuccessful run for Senate in 1976 and a run for governor in 1980. In Providence, though, he could always count on support and was re-elected as mayor twice, in 1976 and 1982. In the meantime, he disavowed his allegiance to the Republican Party and started running as an independent candidate. Was Cianci a good mayor? Well, he was certainly loud, and did not lack in charisma, the brash folksy kind. That being said, he was heavy-handed, such as when he sent police officers armed with shotguns to end a strike of garbage collectors. His hands were also rather heavy from all the bribes. He might have been the anti-mafia guy, but Cianci learned a lot from the wise guys. Stacks of bills wrapped in aluminum foil were piling up in his mother's safe during all three of his mayoral terms in the 70s and 80s. The city ran on kickbacks, and as mentioned before, some parts of the municipal budget disappeared without a trace. We're talking about roughly $16 million in 80s money. So far, I have been describing a clearly despicable figure. It won't help when I tell you that he got accused of raping a woman at gunpoint during his time at law school, and only very narrowly avoided getting prosecuted for it. His consequence for the alleged crime ended up being paying the victim $3,000, but only after she attempted to kill herself. So why were people enamored with this piece of shit? Buddy Cianci understood optics, and how to appeal both to the working class parts of his city, as well as to the quote-unquote elitist national media. He would gladly and very publicly claim credit for anything going well in Providence, and also made appearances at pretty much any event that would have him, whether it was a parade or a family barbecue. Cianci talked fast, made complicated matters seem simple, and at first glance stood apart from other politicians, because he told it like it is. All the while he was filling up his pockets with bribes and establishing corruption as a core part of his governance strategy. His mayoral tenure came to an abrupt end in 1984 for frankly crazy fucking reasons. It was not the corruption that got him, but the fact that he kidnapped and tortured a contractor named Raymond DeLeo. We're talking a guy getting tied down and being burned by cigarettes here. Why? Well, because Cianci thought that DeLeo was in a relationship with his soon-to-be ex-wife, Sheila Bentley, who Cianci was separated from at the time. It was a relationship which both Bentley and DeLeo denied. Cianci was convicted and received a 5-year suspended sentence. As a felon, he was not allowed to run in the special elections organized after he was forced to resign, but he did try. Alas, that was the end of Mayor Buddy Cianci, for now. A quick aside about his ex-wife. Sheila Bentley stayed silent on Cianci for most of her life until an interview with the Boston Globe in 2019, in which she described years of domestic violence and psychological abuse by Cianci. What a guy, huh? Even before the interview, she got very public support in a very unexpected place. Bentley was featured on a nationally syndicated court TV show called Caught in Providence, where she had to answer for 6 unpaid parking tickets. The judge, Frank Caprio, dismissed all of her tickets and noted that Bentley had, quote, suffered enough. Might have been a little conflict of interest, since Caprio also presided over Bentley's wedding to her current husband, but that's just how things are run in Providence. After his stint as a mayor, Cianci became a radio host, essentially a political shock jock. Can we finally stop talking about him and get to the video games? All about that. Cianci returned as a mayoral candidate in 1990 after the state Supreme Court ruled that he can in fact run for mayor again. 9 lives and all that. What is important to our story is that Cianci was also one of the 5 candidates that agreed to be a part of a rather unusual contest. Finally, we get to SimCity. I will not, however, go through a whole history of the game. For that, there are wonderful videos by Kim Justice and Lazy Game Reviews, which I will link in the description. What I will note is that the first ever city builder came out in 1989. A mere year before the mayoral race in Providence that this story is concerned with. Will Wright based his game partially on the work of J. Wright Forrester, especially his book Urban Dynamics. Forrester believed that computer models of complex systems, including social ones, can bring more insight into the root of problems rather than a simple debate. Wright took this to heart, but also always maintained that his game is not a serious work of modeling, rather a work of satire and exaggeration. That is why almost every nuclear plant will eventually explode, and your city gets regularly attacked by kaiju monsters. Enter Joseph Brody, a freelance writer for the newspaper Providence Journal, also a 15-year-old at the time. The guy wrote pieces for a widely read newspaper at an age when most of his peers only interacted with newspapers by throwing them at their neighbors' porches. Young Joseph's idea was simple and fun. Let's get the mayoral candidates to run Providence and SimCity and see how they do with the virtual town. To Brody's editors, this surely sounded like a puff piece only a kid could come up with. Despite its surface silliness though, there was a good reason to run it. While personal computers were not unheard of in 1990, only about 15% of the nation owned a PC. Based on surveys conducted by the US Department of Labor, most of those 15% were young professionals in their mid-20s to mid-30s, with a high level of college education and good income. SimCity became very popular in part because it played well with this demographic, used to dealing with manipulating values in complex systems, which at its core is what gameplay of SimCity boils down to. Thus, Brody's SimCity mayoral tryout would attract also a large part of the voting segment of the population. 5 mayoral candidates signed up to take part. Democratic candidates Victoria Lederberg, Andrew Rinaldo, and Nicholas Easton, as well as 2 independents, Fred Lippitt and of course Buddy Cianci. Brody didn't think that letting the prospective mayors simply make their own city would make much sense. Instead, he enlisted a team of experts, a computer scientist, a cartographer, and a research assistant, that together build as realistic replica of Providence as possible, within the confines of SimCity's editor. Brody would also not require the candidates to completely learn the game. Instead, he would explain what is possible to do within the rules, and execute orders from the candidates by himself. That was only fair, given that most of the candidates were not skilled PC users. One candidate, Victoria Lederberg, refused for Brody to take the reins. She wanted to control the computer herself, even though she was previously computer illiterate. Brody was a grandson of one of her friends, and she did not take him or the game seriously. This attitude spelled her doom. When the article about her SimCity prowess came out, it was a disaster. Lederberg built so many police stations in the city that crime did not have a chance. But neither did her city's budget, which skyrocketed, and she had to impose impossibly high taxes on her oppressed Sim residents. She also destroyed the city's electric power plant and built a nuclear one instead. Remember, nuclear plants tended to explode in SimCity, and this election took place only 4 years after the Chernobyl disaster. Not a great look for Lederberg. Even worse look was her bulldozing a church, presumably to make room for more police stations, an action that did not reflect well on a candidate in a 63% Catholic Providence. Lederberg lost the Democratic primary to Andrew Rinaldo by 482 votes, and thus fell out of the mayoral race. But hey, it was just a game. It's not like Lederberg blamed Brody for losing her election or anything, right? Well, she did, and in fact promised Brody that she would never talk to him, his friend's grandson, ever again. A promise which she kept until her death in 2003. Analdo himself was a much better sim mayor, but it's more likely that what won him the primaries was his promise to tax universities and use the proceeds to help the working class population. In the end though, the real fight was between the two independent candidates, who had both very similar and very different playstyle. Fred Lippitt was born during the First World War and served in the second one at the time that Buddy Cianci was a literal baby. So it's somewhat understandable that Lippitt was not particularly hip with his newfangled computer stuff. As pretty much all of the candidates, he tried to be tough on crime by building a lot of police stations. In order to do that, however, he tended to literally talk to the virtual policeman on the screen, as well as picking up an imaginary phone and opining about his SimCity and life in general. Mind you, I don't think this was a sign of dementia or anything. Rather, I believe that Lippitt, just like Liederberg, didn't take the game very seriously. But unlike her, he saw a good PR opportunity. In the end, his virtual Providence had a low crime rate, but was economically suffering due to Lippitt ignoring the industrial and commercial districts. Finally, we get to Cianci. As with everything, it really seemed that he put his 110% into the game. Not only did he manage to lower the crime rate, but he was the only one to balance his budget correctly. For the 17 virtual years he looked over the digital Providence, the city boomed, and at the end of the game, he left his sim residents with a surplus in the city's coffers. His attentiveness to the budget was the main feature of the article written about his gameplay, and it was noted that Cianci was the only candidate that wrote down his expenses on a piece of paper next to him. Oh, and he ended up winning the real election as well. Was it because of his gaming prowess? Maybe not, but I would not completely dismiss the idea. Cianci won the vote by 317 votes, a rather small margin. He had a strong core of voters that were gonna go for him no matter what, but it's not impossible that the nerds who read the Providence Journal might have been swayed by him showing that he can run a fake city pretty well. Buddy was going nowhere after his triumphant return from the felonies. He was re-elected in 1994 and in 1998, when he ran unopposed. Was it deserved? That's a tricky question. Providence was transformed under Cianci's second stint as a mayor, for the better. He spent a lot on renovating a lot of cultural and natural sites of the city. He made tourism, health industry and the arts his main focus, and it helped the former industrial town thrive. He even made a concerted effort to improve things for the queer residents of his city, and appointed a mayoral liaison to the gay community. This put Providence on the list of top 10 cities to live in as a lesbian, as decided by the Girlfriends magazine, something that would be absolutely unimaginable just a few years prior. Underneath all the glamour though, Buddy kept on using his old tricks, which finally landed him in jail. FBI's Operation Plunderdome uncovered a vast network of corruption in the mayoral office, and as the leader, Cianci ended up serving a 5-year sentence. Somehow that was still not the end of Buddy the mayoral candidate. After he got out of prison in 2007, he came back as a radio host, and in 2014, he ran for office once again. What is crazier is that as a 2-time felon and known corrupt politician, he was very solidly second, with 45% of the vote to 52% of the Democratic winner George O. Elorza. The only thing that stopped Buddy was death. He died of cancer in 2016, and his funeral procession in an open casket attracted large crowds. In the end, he served the city for 21 years, served some time in jail, and no matter what, he had one pretty good playthrough of SimCity in the early 90s. So what did we learn? Should we have all mayors play a city planning game before they take office? Probably not. As Will Wright himself said, SimCity is not a realistic portrayal of real life. Probably the best ever game of SimCity was played by Vincent Ocasla, a Filipino student of architecture. His sim town called Magnasanti had a population of 6 million, was financially completely self-sufficient, and ran like that for 50,000 in-game years. The cost? Only an extremely low life expectancy, high pollution, a brutal police state, and no schools or hospitals. Truly a dream to strive for any modern town. Now, just like in sports, mayoral tryouts in the virtual world don't seem to be a good idea. But instead of not being able to enjoy the physicality of athletes, in this case we would completely obscure the human parts of what it means to be a leader. Balancing spreadsheets is part of the job, sure, but more importantly, a mayor, or a president, should also clearly present strong morals and background clear of severe violations of law. How about we all just don't vote for rapists and swindlers? Thank you for watching my 8th YouTube video. This one took me a bit of time as I was dealing with some personal stuff, and honestly was stuck writing the script. You can find all the sources in the description, but I must especially shout out a great piece by Vice's Jason Kabler that covers this whole story. If you want to know more about Buddy Cianci, I must recommend the first season of the podcast Crime Town, that goes through his time as a mayor in great detail. Same goes for the book Prince of Providence by Mike Stanton. Tell me what you think of Cianci, SimCity, or asshole politicians in general in the comments. Give a like if you actually liked the video, and if you didn't like it, I challenge you to a breakdancing duel. Australian PhD style. Tape out.